They're good. Okay, there you go. Yeah. The system's working now as it's up way loud, so. Oh, I hear the feedback.
How's the volume in the back? For my very quiet voice. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'll go ahead and get started. If I can make the electronics work.
There you go.
Okay. So I'm going to start by putting up this land acknowledgement. Actually put together by one of our alums, Helen Dancer, who's a member of the Kentucky Indigenous Peoples. And I'll just let you read through that for a moment. If you care to touch what's left of these peoples on campus, there's a small park just north of town that through an arcane procedure involving the library and the College of Agriculture, you can gain access to, walk on some leftover mounds. That's an interesting Saturday afternoon if you want to do it. And let's just remember who was here before us. So I want to start like I always do by thanking everyone here for all your resilience, your hard work, your agility. The last couple of years, I think you've been harder on all of us than any of us would have anticipated. I don't think we're out of the woods yet, but I feel like we're starting to turn the corner on a lot of important parts of what we do, both in and outside of the college. And so I'll leave one of my favorite Dolly Parton quotations up there is for you to ponder as we go through. But it's been a lot of rain, and I think we're due more than one rainbow going forward. So I'll frame what I'm going to talk about today in the same framing we use for the strategic plan. So our three pillars of effort: education, practice, and research, being built on the foundation of our community. And I'll start by talking a little bit about our educational efforts. So to give you some background on who we serve as faculty, those of you who are faculty and the staff, those of you who are staff, our current student body is comprised of about 500 PharmD students, 80% of whom are originated in Kentucky. And at this point, almost 20% of whom are first generation students. So that's been a shift in our demographics over the last decade. We've stayed, like most of the nation, pretty steady at about 60% women and about 40% men. And in the last couple of years, we've ramped up our postgraduate education within the community setting to now include 3 first-year community-based residents who are homed in the college, and then, of course, our sister residency program across the street in the hospital. If we look at the PhD side of the house, it's an interestingly different group of people. So currently about 55 PhD students, only about 15% of whom are from Kentucky, half of whom are really international, and who span a smaller region of underrepresented groups. Also, there's still more women than men. So those of you who are my age and have been teaching in pharmacy for a while will realize that that's been a demographic shift where we flipped in our student body in the last 20 years. And we're running constantly about 25 postdocs in the area. So I haven't in the past presented faculty demographics, but I thought it'd be nice just to see where we're sort of sitting right now from the framework of the students who we're engaging with every day. We're currently 60 or so, I'll come back to that a little later, about 40% women and about 60% men. So the reverse of the demographics in our student body, depending if we use the more expansive historically underrepresented groups We cover 11 of us from a historically underrepresented group. And currently about 35 in the practice side and about 25 in the research side of the house. Still pretty heavy in professors and associate professors. We're starting to rebuild our junior ranks, and so that will be a shift that will continue over the next 10 years. And then somebody in my role in the next 35 or 40 years will have to deal with a slightly less compressed hiring ban and replacing a lot of people as they go into retirement. I hope to be long gone by then. I want to talk a little bit about recruitment. I'm going to come back to this and where we are educationally a couple of times in the next couple of slides. So as we sit right now, we have about 90 seats filled in the PharmD class. That's lower than last year. Last year it was 96, but within where norm of where we were last year. And I think the feeling is we're on track to recruit another class of around 110, perhaps a little more than that. So that's down 30 or so from our historical high of 140 the first year or two I was here, which has been our target for a long time. And one thing I want to emphasize, especially as you'll see some performance metrics in the next slides and discussions we've been having amongst the faculty, we've kept the admission criteria at the same bar level the entire time I've been in the college. And in fact, the numbers for our students have crept up a little bit every year in the time I've been here. So consistently, we're recruiting the same quality of students. And they're staying right now in the 70 or so percent locally originated and about a quarter from out of state or international. And as I mentioned, the disposition between women and men. So when I joined the college, our historically underrepresented group representation in the PharmD class had hovered very consistently around 5 to 6%. We've pushed that up to 9 to 10% pretty consistently now, some years significantly better than that. And again, if you look at it as the broader historically underrepresented groups, we've made some real strides, for example, in first-gen students joining the college, and I think we all ought to be proud of. On the PhD side, we've got 11 students with offers out, and some of whom accepted. Again, about half US and half international, and a wide range of representation in terms of where they come from. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're doing in terms of external measures of curricular quality. So if you're a faculty member and we're in the faculty meeting earlier this month, you will remember me bringing up the board scores and Frank bringing up the board scores. This year, our first pass rate for the first time in our knowledge was about 83%. That's the lowest it's been in the time we've monitored it. And I wanted to put that up in relationship to the national scores and also the last couple of years of data. I usually present about 10 years worth, but I did a little less this year. And the reason I wanted to do this was to point out that the slip in the board scores has been across all the colleges. And the slope of that slip for us has been roughly equivalent to what we're seeing nationally. And I don't have data to put up for comparator schools this year, but I can tell you in talking with the other schools in our normal peer list that we're all experiencing the same issues. And if you just look at the numbers in the board of law scores this year, about half of our peer schools were right in the running with us, and about half of them stayed in the low 90s. So I think we're all trying to figure out sort of what's driving this, where we're going, and where we are. And this is definitely an indicator we want to pay attention to, but I'm pretty confident at this point it's neither an issue of admissions criteria nor an issue of our curriculum. So I think all need to engage in figuring out what has been going on, whether this trend is going to continue, those kinds of issues, and what we need to do to adapt. As you know, our Office of Education is already working on this, identifying underlying factors and trying to intervene. So I'll keep everyone updated as we go along in following years. Also wanted to do is we usually do talk a little bit about where our students are going. So we're still pretty consistently putting about half of our PharmD graduates into residency. The rest, the majority of them going straight into jobs within 6 months of graduation. So this remains a measure that signals that the college is really doing a good job of training our students, that they're being very successful in landing good quality residencies or going directly into work right out of college. And so there's a little bit of disconnect between the first time pass rate and this performance metric, but I think it's an indicator we really are doing quite well with the new curriculum, the last couple classes coming out of that. And I would encourage you to pay attention to this and how these students really do as we sort out what's going on with the board scores.
It's other there.
I'm sorry, Jurgen.
What means other?
That means any job that doesn't fit into these clear historical categories, fellowships, moving into industry in places that aren't covered by community or health system, other jobs that aren't directly related to using the PharmD degree. Anything that doesn't fit in a 4-bin sort.
It doesn't mean they couldn't find a job.
It does not mean they couldn't find a job. If they're on that chart, they found a job within their first 6 months. And the vast majority of our students do that. It's a rarity that they don't, in fact. And that is something to be quite proud of. So I'm going to, as I go through each section, talk a little bit about the strategic plan and how things are going with implementing what we had all agreed to doing. With education, I want to call out the Bachelor's in Pharmaceutical Sciences program, which was part of our strategic goal to evaluate new educational programs and then to commit to resourcing and building them where they were appropriate. So I'll remind you, there were 3 things we were considering within the strategy, which we will continue to consider: a bachelor's program, an expansion of the master's program in population sciences, probably online, and the potential for an online or honors PharmD degree. The other 2 I'm not going to talk about beyond just mentioning them. The bachelor's program, we've committed to conceptually, and we're starting to initiate implementation at this point. So just to remind you why we were doing this, part of it on our side was diversifying our academic portfolio and doing that in a way that recognized national workforce needs and local workforce needs where there weren't appropriate bachelor's degrees delivering for students who work in areas affiliated with pharmacy and pharmaceutical sciences. So we as a faculty envisioned a program with 3 tracks that covered the traditional laboratory-oriented pharmaceutical sciences, a broader vision of data-driven sciences, encompassing what we already do in our master's program and population and outcomes and policy, but also a wider look at analytics and a relatively new area for us, clinical trial management. And we were envisioning this in a program that would set the students up as they graduated to go directly into jobs in those areas, to be ready to go into any post-undergraduate health science profession, so to meet all the prereqs for us, but also for medicine, dentistry, any other professional program, and PhD programs in the area. And then internally for us, to set those students up to maximize their chances for success academically in any of our postgraduate offerings by bringing them in-house early, by having control over their advising and their progression, and by them getting to know us well and vice versa. So as I'll go through in a minute, looking at the timeline, we're still currently targeting matriculating the first recruited cohort into this program in 2025. And where we are with the timeline for this, in case you've forgotten that conceptual vote happened in 2021. We heard our program director, Eric, who's sitting in the audience right now this year, and he's this academic year showed up in January and has jumped in with both feet to getting things really rolling. So right now we're digging into preparing all the package to go to the Senate, particularly syllabi, building an internal curriculum committee to handle those, working it into our governance processes. And so expecting to come back for the final curriculum vote to the faculty in the college later this year, and then to get this into the Senate in the fall. We would expect, if that all goes to plan, to start having students transferring in as early as 2024, and then to be, as I said, matriculating the first class in 2025. So I will say, as we've been broadening the discussion beyond the college, starting to work more deeply with arts and sciences and other potential partners in the university, rolling this out as we're starting to talk about approval, that really what we're seeing is a universal excitement about this program, that places we thought might be viewing themselves as competing with us or actually looking at us as good partners for collaboration, that there's believed to be a big space available for the work in the university, and that the graduates are going to have good jobs available for them, and then we're going to be able to really recruit well within the catchment area in order to populate the program. And because of that enthusiasm and because of our willingness to be this innovative and to push a program at this level, and I'll remind you of the university situation, that there were asks 3-4 years ago to build programs like this, increase enrollment overall within the university. And we're really the first group to come forward with a program of this scope, and potentially to be able to grow to something that is equal in scope to our PharmD program over time. That's really been met with a lot of enthusiasm. We're starting to see resources become available that we weren't expecting. And as those get cemented and we're able to act on them, I'll be bringing them back to let people know how things are going. But I think at this point, externally, it's looking really good. Internally, things are moving along like we expect, and you'll be getting lots of requests to dig in and help build out the syllabi and get ready to submit to the Senate. All right, I'll move on to practice. So I wanted to highlight a few programs that have been growing in this area as we've been expanding it more formally as an area of intention within our strategic plan and our operations. So the first is 2 fellowships, an academic fellowship and a practice advancement fellowship that were brought into being as part of the strategy of expanding into this space, and now have people in them who are doing work. So what we talked about a few years ago has really come to fruition and is starting to grow really nicely. I think soon we'll be growing beyond our ability to control it to staff. And so we're going to have to start actually figuring out how to get bodies into seats and do more work than we were just a few years ago. Part of this has been to continue to expand the affiliated residency programs and the experiential programs for the students. And as the count earlier this week, we're over 800 affiliates in our faculty and residency programs. That's a large expansion in our affiliated workforce delivering experiential practice education, and I think really representative of where we've gone with the curriculum and where we're going with the rest of these programs. So a few highlights for this, and then I'll dive a little bit deeper in one of these. Although I'm gonna, after events of the last week, also, before I talk about the pharmacy, highlight House Bill 48, which was the medical revenue bill passed a couple of years ago that went along with the practice advancement bills that allowed protocol-driven care. If you're not aware, we had a bill introduced in the Senate last week to try to essentially delete protocol-driven care in the state. We, UK Healthcare, the university are pushing back hard on that right now, as are the state pharmacy organizations. But whether or not you're a practitioner, I want to encourage you to engage in discussion around how having protocol-driven care and the ability to bill for it made Kentucky a national leader among a few other states in the United States in advancing care, how that was already directly positively affecting primary care delivery in particular for Kentuckians out in the community across the entire Commonwealth, and how rolling it back would be a tragedy. So you're not having those conversations at your dinner table, at your church, at whatever your favorite social activity is. I'm going to ask you to please do that, because it's important that we continue to advance this practice forward the way this college has helped to drive. And without it, we're going to have a lot of Kentuckians who are going to not have care access. So that's a recent addition, and I'm happy to talk more with anybody about it, as I'm sure many of your colleagues are. Please pay attention to that. It's important that we be unified in pushing this. So I want to talk a little bit more about the Flip Pharmacy program, which we've been expanding. And what this is a program aimed really at reworking community-based pharmacy practice towards providing this pharmacy site-oriented, long-term, care-oriented practice for patients. And so it's part of the component to drive individual pharmacies towards providing access to primary care and enhancing what patients can get through hospital systems. We had been involved in this for a while, but in the last few years, it's been a focus to expand and grow it. And internally, CAP and the practice office have been working to develop a curriculum and to develop outreach in order to help build up capacity within pharmacists in the state and to build up capacity within the affiliated pharmacies in this program in order to really make this a forefront of how practice takes place across the entire state. So it's our new graduates, it's our graduates who are practicing right now who we trained in this type of care, and it's also connecting to our graduates who might have graduated 40 years ago with a bachelor's degree and might feel very uncomfortable delivering this kind of care. We're intending as a college to provide support and education to execute this type of care throughout the Commonwealth, and Flip the Pharmacy is an important part of that effort. Okay, I want to move on and talk a little bit about research. So I'm going to apologize to any of you who were only here to get my list of personally favorite papers, because we had a few other things we had to talk about this year. And so I'm not going to do that this year. I will tell you all, I still very much enjoy reading your work. Some days it's the only thing that gets me through 6 or 8 hours of meetings. So rest assured it will come back in subsequent state of the college exams. Putting my own sense of what it's like to stand up here and do this for you every year on here. So we've continued to do well in research. I will highlight a few challenges that we need to deal with amongst all the rain that's happened this year. So in the last year, we put out 200 peer-reviewed publications as a body. That's in the normal range for us. Had us well over 20 million in extramural funding this year. That put us still in the top 10 in terms of pharmacy school funding per PI, which I think is probably the best metric to use to look at that aspect of what we do. And we bounce up and down. We've been in the top 6 the time I've been monitoring that criteria. And a couple major new awards coming in. I wanted to highlight in areas that were within our strategic plan. So just to point out, Dr. John and Dr. Flannery bringing in money in 2 areas, particularly around substance use disorders and infectious disease that were areas we had highlighted in our strategic plan. And a couple things I want to highlight, and this may seem a little funny being placed in front of talking about faculty hiring, which I will do in a minute, but part of what I negotiated for when I was hired was the ability to expand laboratory space for our research faculty. We were stymied in doing that in this building for a variety of reasons that we don't need to go into, but we're able to negotiate for space in the Healthy Kentucky research building across the Pedway here. And that space has been built out for chemical biology, pharmacology, medicinal chemistry type of work. And we've occupied that space now, which is freed up space on the 3rd and 4th floors in this building to remodel in order to accommodate all the hiring we're going to do. So I'm probably the only dean who's ever going to make this statement. And I'm probably not going to make it again in 5 years, but for the next couple of years, we don't need to worry about research space as we're doing hiring. We have plenty of space available in order to recruit everybody that we want to recruit. The one issue we're dealing with is those of us who run animal heavy labs. We're still sorting out, trying to get people in our building or immediately associated with us. But that space has been really important. It's given us a lot of expansion room to go on. On the sideline and in collaboration with us and everybody else, the VPR's office has been centralizing a lot of the processes, and I think some of us have been living through those. Some of them are going to be really useful to us with increased efficiency. So the Project Gateway piece, for example, I think is important, and as it gets smoothed out, will help us all with sort of all the underlying back matter that goes into grants, as an example. And then we've been building, based on the strategic plan, internal capacity for driving research that translates to the clinic and research within the clinic, as well as backfilling on infrastructure and equipment, which were things that came up during the strategic planning process as really important to our research faculty. So that's all going on, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Then highlighting one of the strategic processes that came out of our plan, which was the concept of building infrastructure, building pilot funding internally, connecting that to local pilot funding in order to build a fundraising trajectory to lead to sustainable extramural funding in areas that we didn't have before, and particularly large team-driven grants. So I wanted to highlight this strategy as working and point out this trajectory and a nice large U-series grant, one of these large team-based grants that Dr. Euler has brought in for doing collaborative work, looking at opioid use and particularly reduction of opioid use in dental procedures. So this had a pilot program funding from the college and from the IRC program, which I will remind you spun out of the college a few years ago and now is run out of the VPR's office. Linda, I thought I saw you. Linda in the back really spearheaded that here, and then the process of transferring it to a university-wide program. And then this has been leveraged upwards towards U-series grants. So this is exactly the kind of win we want in the research arena. It's all the pieces we want to do. A junior professor being able to establish themselves, to bring in federal extramural funding that's going to be durable, to build a collaborative, impactful translational program within the university that we didn't have before. And I hope I'll be talking about a lot of other examples of this. I'm trying to make eye contact with all the newbies out in the audience as we're going forward. And our work has continued to be impactful. So I'm trying to pivot deliberately a little bit away from talking about individual people in the college and more to talking about us as a group when we're thinking about our success. And so this is a plot that Chris Belcher's group has generated, looking at total citations over time based on the papers written in the year that starts each band. And Chris pointed out to me that for the first time, we've hit a point where with 2,000 new citations for the band of papers that came out in 2020. So we've been consistently growing in the number of citations we're getting, and the trajectory at which our work is getting cited seems to be going up as well. So this is a marker of really sort of as an aggregate how we're doing and influencing the external utilization of our work in others' academic settings, i.e. what we're doing is important enough. People are reading our papers and citing them, even if they were published within the last few years. So this, I think, is a trajectory we want to maintain and continue to increase going forward. All right, I want to talk a little bit about faculty, staff, and the rest of our community. So some of this I put in the other slides, but I'll just to reframe for you again. Right now, running about 60, 70 faculty and staff in the college, about 25 captive postdocs, 550 students in our program, 800 plus voluntary faculty associated with them. And at this point, as well as we know, 6,700 alumni. So that's a pretty good spread of people. At least 4,500 or so actually like to talk to us occasionally, which also is pretty good. And among those who communicate with the college, well, we know where they are. And so Melody, I'll just point out that we still are spread out across the globe. And you can see the impact of our international innovation in education in particular, in our presence in countries like Japan and Thailand, where we've had long-term educational collaborations that will continue. And that's something I also hope we will continue to expand over time. And our graduates really excel over the long time frame. So we have company CEOs, founders, presidents, academic administrators at the chair, dean, provost, and president level, and all across. And I always like to remind myself, I think the group I never really appreciated until I took this job is all the creative, dedicated, community engaged individual practitioners and academicians who come out of here and go to wherever they wind up landing and influence their local community in enormously positive ways. But when I meet them, which is a privilege of having my job, getting to go around and meet a lot of people like that, they look back on this place and talk about the community, how engaged they were when they were here, and how what they learned here built their career for them by setting in their mind rigor and innovation and hard work is really core parts of what they do. And so that community is incredibly and broadly and deeply impactful. All right, a little bit more talking about sort of what's going on in the local community. We've continued to do pretty well in bringing in money to the college, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with that in a second. We've continued what we started a few years ago of really trying to build an intentional and coherent group internal to the college who is focused on enabling our students to craft a career in which they're going to be successful. So to do what I just said, which is to leave our institution and excel wherever they go and doing whatever they decide to do in that incredible breadth of careers that they can take. And as COVID has finally at least gotten endemic enough that our death rates have started to drop and at least our fear has waned, we've been able to get back out on the road and start to re-engage with groups of faculty across the country, and groups of alumni, and we'll continue to do that. We're going to try what we were just getting started doing as COVID hit, which is to engage more with faculty and staff. If we're going somewhere where you're from, for example, to ask you to join us in a day or two on the ground somewhere in order to help reinforced community when we go there. So when I call and say, please join me in Maysville or Paducah, you'll know why. And I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about a key part of this, which is our faculty academy. So I probably don't need to belabor why this was a key part of the strategic plan. We are one of the major stakeholder groups in the college. We're very important to the educational missions and the research missions and the practice missions. And as we all know, we've been struggling with a combination of factors that have reduced the size of the faculty. So we have a strategy that all of the stakeholder groups help to build, which is to leverage this short-term decrease in our faculty numbers to use cluster hires in order to build groups of faculty who will be able to drive the strategic directions that we had highlighted in the rest of the plan. And these, of course, are going to be homed in our two departments. And we're using the strategy we've used the last couple of years, which is combining, taking a look strategically at research, at practice, at education, what are our needs in those areas, being able to define those, integrate those up into faculty-led searches in order to identify people for the departments, and really to try to focus the resources that we're investing in those places in two places, one of which is making sure really as many as possible of the faculty we bring in to the academy are aligned to our core disciplines and are emerging in new directions, including clinical translation and team-based science as possible, and also to really focus on rebuilding our retiring pool by recruiting junior faculty who are going to be able to continue the college tradition over the next, hopefully 40 years that they'll remain with us, because they're going to do so well that they're going to stay and they're not going to leave us. They're going to like it so well that they're going to stay. So to put this a little quantitatively, we've been trying to get this in one graphic. So I'll walk you through what this is. This is our faculty numbers from 2018 projected out to 2027. They're color coded, so dark blue is PS and light blue is PPS. And I've put a couple other pieces of key data on here just to remind everybody what the last couple of years have been like. So in about 2019, we had reinitiated hiring. We had started to get a couple faculty in every year, and we were coming back to our steady state number faculty. And then several things happened, the most notable of which was everyone's favorite pandemic. This led in the middle of the year in 2020 to several confounding factors: the shutdown, budget cut of what in reality wound up being about 12% of our state budget when you factor in the direct cut to our state budget, as well as the sort of ancillary stuff that filtered over secondarily to that. And a hiring freeze that, you know, depending on how you counted the numbers, effectively lasted about 18 months, formally lasted about a year. So in all of those, in order to deal with that hiring freeze, we put in place a retirement incentive program to allow us to recoup some of the recurring state budget that we had dedicated to our faculty and staff, and be able to redeploy that towards new hires. But that, of course, resulted in people going on to phased retirement or immediate retirement when we put that program in place. And all of those pieces together with a couple of people moving, led to our numbers going down, depending on how you count it, 10 or 11 faculty at the start of the last academic year. So I don't probably have to belabor for you, in a faculty of less than 80, losing 10 or 11 people is a lot. And I probably don't have to tell any of you what your workload has been like because of that. Certainly my workload has gone up. I wasn't expecting to be teaching an extra 6 lectures in medicinal chemistry this year, although thank you whoever decided to do that, because you can give me something I enjoy, I really appreciate it. But and that was all going on in the context of still smoothing out the last bit of our PharmD curriculum change, and in the midst of doing a PhD program change. So starting now, what I'm showing you on this graph through 2026 is a concrete plan that is fully resourced and based on what we've been able to do to recover from the budget cut that we took. And in order to mobilize, for example, the resources that came out of the retirement incentive and other places that we've been able to manage the budget. So we are funded now to go through up to 4 hires last cycle, this cycle, and the next cycle to bring in a total of 12 faculty in a 3-year period. So that those resources are there. We're ready to pull each of those offers together and to make them, as long as the search processes, the faculty run search processes, bring in people who we want and who are of the quality we want, and who are going to drive the programs that we want to drive as an aggregate. So that's positive, and this will get us very close to back to historical steady state norms in the academy. And I'm going to pause there to make a couple comments. So the first comment is we're all a little tired. It's been a hard 3 years. It's really important that we engage fully and broadly all of our faculty, all of our staff, and as many of our trainees as we can into finding the right people. And it's really important that we make those hires culturally the way we would have to match what we've all agreed are our long-term needs. So we really need to fight an urge to make an extra hire, for example. If we all say we're looking and we say there are 3 out of 4 people this year, we should hire the 3 people we really want. And I and John and Craig will make sure that the resources are there to roll a 4th person over to the next year if we need to. So pay attention to the long-term gain. The strategies we've got at play are the right ones, and we've invested in them. So let's keep that in mind. Let's stay engaged in delivering this, and let's do it the way we need to. And the flip side of that is, if we decide we need to make a 5th hire this year or next year, let us know that. And we're going to move every mountain we can possibly move to be flexible in order to get another person on board, especially if you're coming and saying, hey, we got this person and we really want for this reason that's in our strategic plan that we're trying to do. So we're going to come out of this hole, and we're going to, I think, really do well coming out of this hole. We need to keep our eye on the ball. We need to get through another couple of years of grindstone to get there. All right, so that's that piece getting us up to about the 2026 year or so. So it's at that point that the bachelor's program should start to generate significant revenue. If it grows the way that we're expecting, it should enable us to keep growing the academy beyond where we currently are. So I'll remind you, before the state took away 12% of our state budget, that was our goal back in 2019, was to add another 4 faculty or so to the program. And we should be able to do that with all the financial projections we've got in place and what we're expecting to do, if we keep our eye on the ball and we keep delivering what we need to do. And as our research extramural funding recovers, and as our practice revenue generates, and as our other sources of revenue get built out, and as our tuition revenue goes up from the bachelor's program. And as we go through discussing the other strategic initiatives, part of what I will do will be make sure we all understand the fiscal side of each of those decisions, the pluses and the minuses. You know, what would it mean to us as a group in terms of our ability to grow? if we brought in a new master's program. Or if we expanded the PharmD program to be online. And I'll also be there, as I'm sure many of you will be, saying we're not doing any of that stuff if it's not the quality offering that we believe in. And it's not delivering an educational opportunity to students that they need. And isn't going to do the things that we believe are important to our communities locally and distantly. So I think this is actually a really happy graph if you think about it as a progression. And I believe we have hit the bottom and we're going to come out of this really happy with where we're going. And we're going to come out ancillarily with a younger, invigorated, exciting group of faculty who are probably going to take us in directions where we weren't anticipating when we wrote the strategic plan 2 years ago. And I, for one, really look forward to seeing where 12 new voices at the table are gonna push us as a group. Here are a few of the voices that have joined us. So Lindsay, Matt, Anel, and Hind. I know you've been told welcome once or twice or a few times, but welcome again. And we look forward to having you amongst us. All right, last little bit of stuff. We just want to talk a little bit about the other side of the budget. So lest you be worried, we have fully accommodated the reduction in state base into our thinking this year. As was one of my goals, we've really hit a zero sum operating. So we're no longer dependent on rolling over money from year to year in a reserve the way we were before. Of course, that also means we're not building up the reserve intentionally the way we were. So sometimes John is a little more anxious than he used to be, but this is part of the plan and leaves us in a really good spot. So one of the things we've recognized is our students are struggling with the cost of coming to the pharmacy, our pharmacy school. We have a couple things at play that may reduce that cost. And we will continue to do those, and I'll hope to play them out. Can never get the slides short enough. I'll brief you on those as they become successful. But what we have been doing this year and will continue to do is to focus on raising money for scholarships and to roll that money into scholarships and to make those scholarships durable for PharmD students so that they're able to be fiscally successful during the program. And that will continue to be a focus. Sorry, I'm slow-winded today. So as you all know, accreditation is amongst us. I think it's going along the way we want it to be going along. I just showed you what I think is our biggest hole, which is our faculty numbers and our academy numbers, and that we have a concrete plan for not only getting through that, but emerging well. And I encourage you to stay engaged in this, make sure we get everything done and done well and out. I short-shrifted accreditation there, but I'll leave up a Hannah Hart quote I'm fond of and squeeze in a minute or two for questions.